Welcome to Breaking Banks. Welcome back to Breaking Banks this week. I am your host, Brett King. Joining me in the hosting chair is Jason Henricks. And we're going to talk about digital adoption, digital transformation, open banking, all that good stuff today. Really the core element of open finance and where we're going with that. The guests on our show today, we have Ginger Baker, the head of financial access at Plaid. Welcome back, Ginger.
Thanks so much, Brett. Great to be here.
Jonathan Pitts, who's the head of policy at Plaid.
Always happy to be here, even if you're going to give me some extra letters that my name doesn't quite rate, Brett. I'm one of the sad short Johns, not the
with the H,
Jonathans.
no H. Yes, okay. Sorry, John Pitts. My apologies.
No
John.
worries.
And Gareth Gaston, the Executive Vice President and Chief Digital Officer for Platforms and Capabilities at US Bank.
Hey, good morning. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Now, you guys know we've been covering a fair bit of open banking stuff recently. Obviously, in terms of a lot of the sort of smart banking wave that we're seeing that has really got a big boost in activity as a result of the pandemic. Open banking and open finance initiatives are really critical to this, giving us access to the data that is important to give you a lens on your own personal finances, or if you're in a company, on your cash flow and the business of your, how your business is operating. And so recently we saw an announcement between Plaid and US Bank in terms of their collaboration. And we thought we'd dive a little bit more into this as sort of part of the flow of how, we're seeing the smart infrastructure of 21st century banking starting to emerge. So a fun fact about Gareth, he's a native of Scotland and a former officer in the British Army. Is that right? British Army Reserves, Gareth, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
So, tell me about your role at US Bank and how you came into that role.
Yeah, sure. So I've been with the bank about 7 years now. For the first kind of 4 or 5 years, I basically ran consumer digital contact centers. It was a role called omnichannel. And then as we decided to kind of really take digital into a more enterprise capability for the bank, I took on a new role which didn't exist before, which is to really take the best of what we have and turn it into enterprise assets. So that kind of is on both the technology side. So I'm responsible for creating an ongoing optimization of our core digital technology platform. So think about things like the actual websites and mobile apps themselves from a design, from a technology perspective, sales and onboarding, authentication, communication platforms, all that kind of stuff. And then I'm also responsible for agile ways of working, so things Scrum Masters and coaches and agile methods, and also our user experience design team, so all of the designers and architects and things like that.
Now, how has the posture around digital changed internally at US Bank, during the pandemic, given the acceleration in use of digital?
Yeah, no, it's been really fun actually, because the level of intensity, I mean, it was already quite intense and we already had a really big focus on digital. But what it did really was it lit up some areas that were, of course, very important for customers. So for example, our prepaid business, we issue prepaid cards for unemployment for about half the states in the country. And of course, as much of the country became unemployed, the need for prepaid cards with unemployment on it really lit up. So one of the things we did was massively upgrade our we actually took the opportunity to integrate prepaid rather than being a standalone app. We actually integrated it into our main mobile app and gave it the benefit of the huge investments that we've made in our mobile app. And then we did things like, with the payroll protection program, the small business lending, managed to, get not only the ability to apply for a loan in real time, but also electronically transfer that over to the government for fulfillment, which we all did in lightning speed. So it was really great to have already have been on a digital transformation journey and have many of these raw capabilities in place, and that helped us accelerate even further as customers placed additional demands on us during the pandemic. So it was actually really, intense but fun and rewarding to be able to help out our customers in such a constructive way.
Now, I know with Dom and the team and overall, you guys have been quite progressive in terms of, digitization, but do you feel like sort of the last vestiges of resistance to this are sort of, falling away?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we've had so much of resistance, if you like, as just the normal things that you find in bigger companies around, priorities. I think the thing that's interesting is, if we were to wind back, 5+ years ago, when people said digital, they probably meant a website and a mobile app. And now digital, of course, is just about everything because, it's any screen that a customer or an employee touches. And then it's generally anything that falls underneath that powers that screen or that data. So I think the definition for digital is so much broader than it's ever been. And that actually, ironically, in one way helps because it means that you're prioritizing a bigger pool. In some cases, I guess it hinders because it's a heck of a lot more to think about and prioritize. But I generally think it's a net positive that almost everything is basically digital these days. I also think the other thing that's really helpful is it's not a department anymore that's doing digital. It's the whole bank that's digital. And we certainly see that. Our small business team, our consumer team, there's digital initiatives and fixed capacity funded teams in every business line now, which is great to see.
I always say this when I'm doing board presentations and stuff like that on digital. I say, you guys have a head of digital. That's really good. But you know what? Apple doesn't have a head of digital. Tim Cook is the head of digital. Amazon doesn't have a head of digital. Jeff Bezos is the head of digital. And so, understanding that I think is sort of critical.
Yeah.
Hey, John and Ginger, last time you joined us, we talked about open finance and we talked about changing regulation around that. And particularly sort of the emergence of smart rails, and, sort of this infrastructure that we're going to need for the 21st century. I noticed in the announcement that you jointly made with US Bank in respect to open finance, you talked about secure open finance very explicitly. So maybe, John, do you want to cover off, what's the difference between when we talk about open banking and open finance and the fact that you guys decided to talk about secure open finance specifically?
Sure, Brett. So let me just start really briefly on sort of the difference between open banking and open finance and the time we find ourselves in. And then I think Ginger should go in depth on the sort of secure open finance because she did the hard work with Gareth and US Bank in really bringing this to reality. So, I think as we talked about last time, this transition from open banking to open finance is one from a consumer has access to their bank account information and sort of this one directional flow of information from banks to fintechs to open finance, which is a consumer having access to all of their financial information and really the ability to control and direct it wherever they get the most value out of it. And I think one of the things that was most striking to me now almost 18 months into this pandemic and this forced acceleration of digitization and the digitization of open finance strategies for banks and fintechs and everyone were the comments by the acting comptroller of the currency 2 weeks ago at his first testimony in front of Congress, where he said, digitization is here. And it's no longer a question of putting the toothpaste back in the tube or sort of adjusting slowly to meet the demands of consumers. It's here, and every bank and regulator needs to adjust to that reality as quickly as they possibly can, because that's what the future looks like. And so to me, having made that sort of psychological policy move into, yes, open finance is what we are actually talking about, and we're not talking about it as something in the future, we are talking about it as something in the present, made it all that more critical for a deal like this between Plaid and US Bank to not just move things forward to open finance, not just move things forward for Plaid's customers, US Bank's customers, and indeed our shared customers, but move them forward in a way that made the consumer safe and secure in that transition to an open finance environment. And Ginger, maybe you can sort of get into some of the details about how we were able to do that and why this partnership was so special in not just launching that open finance world, but launching a secure one.
Sure, happy to talk about that. We are certainly on this crusade now, right, to move to an API-based ecosystem for how data is exchanged between parties. It's super important for us to ensure that people actually have access to the information that they need and are able to permission their financial data to the applications that they want to take advantage of. And that need and that realization has become ever more clear during the pandemic. And what made the partnership with US Bank so interesting was that we were able to do that in a way that we think really facilitated more secure exchange of data, in addition to driving transparency and just awareness for people about where their information has been permissioned and giving them opportunities and tools to take action on that information. So at the very simplest level, what we've done is we've exchanged the credentials that people use to log into Plaid and to US Bank systems with tokens, right? So that's the first switch there, was that we did a token exchange with US Bank. And that just helps us to eliminate credentials from the ecosystem and protect people's data. The second piece of this in the transparency arena was syncing US Bank and Plaid systems so that US Bank customers, whether or not they're accessing their information through US Bank's site or Plaid's site, Plaid portal, can see all of the different applications to where they have permissioned their data and then take action on that information. If they've decided they no longer want to share their information with a particular application, or they've forgotten that they may have shared their information with an app, they can delete that or take action on that. And so those two pieces were very fundamental in driving that foundation of security, transparency, and awareness for people.
Well, let's dig into, because I don't know that most people think beyond the surface of why it's so important to get to this credentialless environment and what this idea of tokenization, why that becomes important. Then Ginger, let's go into the second pillar right after that. But Gareth, from the customer perspective, and you with the voice of the customer, in mind, why does this credentialless move make such a big difference?
Yeah, I mean, we can probably all relate to. I think we live in an era where people don't really think about it that much. We give away half of our life's personal information so we can play a quiz on Facebook, for example, right? So without thinking much about it. So it's not really, I think, first of all, I think when customers are interacting with financial apps, whether it's US Bank's app or whether it's a Fintech app that's in the App Store, there's probably a built-in level of trust that if they're going to give you some information, you're going to keep it safe. And even with the best will in the world, we know that isn't always the case. And so what we were really concerned about was, we know that first of all, we fundamentally believe that the customer has the right to access their information wherever they want to access it. So if they want to sign up for a fintech service through any given app store, then we want to help facilitate that. But to Ginger's point, and we want to do that in a safe and secure way where they don't even have to worry or think about the fact that their credentials are stored somewhere else, anywhere other than US Bank in this case. So really it's about continuing to empower the customer and give them access to the information they want, to use it in the way that they want to, whilst at the same time keeping them safe and secure without them having to really think about it. And then building on exactly what Ginger said, it's not a one-time set it and forget it type thing. People's preference change over time. So giving them multiple ways that they can look at and think about where they've shared their information and make a different decision whenever they want to was really important with this as well.
I think the one thing I've always sort of had a question in respect to my mind, I'll put this out to the group, is obviously this permission-based thing, particularly with GDPR in Europe, you see, a lot of effort being made into permissioning data access. But the more and more partnerships and, permissions that we need to put in place, just managing that is going to become complex over time. Ginger, John, do you guys have a view of how an average customer with multiple banking and other relationships, healthcare providers and so forth, that have to start thinking about what data goes to which provider, how we manage that complexity in the future?
Yeah, so I think the obvious answer to that, but it doesn't make it the easy answer, is that wherever the consumer can best exercise that control in that consumer's sort of own personal life is the right way to do it, right? So the cleanest way to sort of solve for that complexity is actually what Plaid and US Bank have been able to accomplish here in this partnership, which is if the consumer wants to go to US Bank and see all their connections and then not just see them, but exercise control over them, say, I don't want to share this data anymore, I would like this data deleted, they can do it at US Bank. They can also do it at Plaid, right? And that's really the critical piece, is that the infrastructure we are building is neutral as to the consumer's choice, giving the consumer more control over how their data is being managed. And Gareth said something earlier that I just want to double down on, because I think it's really critical here in thinking about not just this partnership, but the overall growth of the ecosystem. Was, consumers have gotten used to sharing a lot of information with social media companies in a way where sort of the benefit back to them and the trust they have in that is somewhat unclear. And I'm probably being slightly generous in saying somewhat unclear. I think one of the things that was a solid foundation and will be a solid foundation for this partnership is understanding that trust is the core of the business of US Bank, and it's also the core of the business of Plaid. And financial services is in fact different, and the expectations on financial services data are different. That means that you need to have that sort of consumer transparency, trust, and control as a shared responsibility between every company that's managing that process, and one where that consumer first mindset and consumer trust obligation mindset are front of mind for both of you. And I think that's something where we were able to really align with US Bank on that approach because we had that same attitude as to sort of what we were building and what our responsibility was for our shared customers.
I just want to provide a little bit more detail on why this partnership was so unique, because it is really the first time that Plaid Portal, which is a product that Plaid has in beta right now that allows a user to log into my.plaid.com and see all of their applications and where their data has been permissioned. It's the first time that we've kept that in sync with a partner like US Bank. And US Bank has a USB My Controls, which performs a very similar function, and Gareth can speak more to this. But we have 4,500 applications, right, that we allow people to have access to through Plaid systems, which is a lot, right? That's a lot to manage. And so for people to have access on two different systems that can stay continually in sync was a first for the industry. In addition, another big first for Plaid was that we deleted US Bank's credentials from our systems. And the great thing about how this partnership evolved and the way that the technical implementation was done was that US Bank and Plaid's teams got together and said, what is the right experience for people? What do we want to do to ensure that the consumer is very much at the center? And what we decided to do was not break their experience. I mean, people know where they've permissioned their data through US Bank service as well as Plaid's. They have decided to keep those connections live. We don't want to break those connections for people. And so we enabled a backend token exchange to keep the user experience consistent and delightful and live, just like they expect it to be. And as we continue to go forward in this environment where everything is digital, that expectation is only going to continue to grow. So it's on us to ensure that people can have the delightful experiences that they've come to expect from the way that Fintech has evolved, especially over the last year.
One of the things I find particularly interesting, if we look at, the open banking, the capital O, capital B, John, to your point about open finance and open banking, there's so much embedded in this, but when we think about kind of the genesis, and it started actually with regulation in Europe, but you're coming at it from the opposite and saying, not that regulation isn't important, this is a customer driven initiative, for you. And I'd love to unpack some of the genesis of that as you looked at this, how do we actually empower those experiences, not break the experiences? And it actually is customer driven, is, getting us to the same result that, it really took the FCA and the EU pushing, across the pond.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take some of that. So, I mean, this actually started like many of so we've got a terrific innovation function at US Bank, and this was Dominic's now the Chief Digital Officer, but when he was running the innovation team, and if I went back kind of two and a half years ago, like many of the things like our voice assistant or some of our AI-driven stuff has come out of our innovation shop. And this was something that the innovation team really thought, we need to be embracing open banking. And as you say, right, there's many different labels that you can put on it, all which mean slightly different things. We saw it from really from two perspectives, really. One is customer need and one is the business opportunity as well. Because I think, first of all, customers customers are increasingly requiring access to their data, but also the way that the world is going to work is going to be much more API driven. And whether that is even our existing clients and from a B2B perspective are looking for, they're not looking for us to give them a screen to do an ACH transfer on, for example. They're looking for us to give them an API. And that's one type of relationship. Another type of relationship, of course, is just being truly open and allowing companies to come and access services directly. So this is something we see as definitely both a customer need and an opportunity as the banking system evolves and as finance opens up. And I think when we approached this to start with, data sharing and partnerships with Plaid and others was really the logical starting point because, in these early days, financial access powered by, Plaid and the fact they have 4,500 companies that are accessing through them gives great insight into the role that data aggregation plays and also the huge demand that there is for the amount of businesses that are starting up based on this model. And so we deliberately prioritized the data sharing aspect of open banking for the last couple of years and really wanted to kind of nail that down and enable that for customers and also get our open banking systems and processes in place for that. And we're also extremely excited about the next phase, which I think is going to be very payments driven. There's lots of great innovation in embedded finance from a payments perspective that we're looking forward to as well. But really view sort of data sharing as the very core foundational part of this. It's hard to think about how you're going to get anything else right if you haven't got something as basic as a secure exchange of information before you start going any further.
Yeah, we saw on the Worldwide Developer Conference that Apple ran this week. We saw an increased focus on privacy. But Gareth, from your perspective, does US Bank get a lot of inbound customer requests or demands around privacy and data sharing, or are you, in your experience, are consumers mostly oblivious about what's happening with their data?
Well, I mean, we don't get that many requests. I mean, they're there, of course, but it's not something that is like a, huge volume, top of mind type thing. I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier in the call. I think this is, until something bad happens, I think people just expect that you're taking good care. And that's kind of what we're doing here is prioritizing, getting to a point where, we've got this great sort of industry leading effort that Ginger was explaining, kind of a first in terms of how we've synced up the data and the fact that we've deleted the credentials. Because really, above all else, that's what we view as most important. It's just to kind of get out the way all of this security stuff, because I really think that customers just expect that we're going to do that for them. And so that's what we wanted to prioritize. But I think, like anything, it probably takes events where, your identity is stolen or something, and that's when it becomes very much front of mind that something's happened somewhere. But very difficult to trace all these things back to their original origins, of course, right? So I think, we just want to play the best role we can play in keeping everything safe and secure.
Like sometimes this is done with good intent, like the 90-day rule that the FCA created around access to third-party apps and the open banking stuff, and yet they found out pretty quickly that actually it didn't work because customers didn't want that workload every 90 days of renewing their, access to an aggregation platform, as an example.
Yeah.
So I think while that was done with the best intentions by the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, it turned out to be a burden on customers. So I think that's the thing that, obviously we get to a point where AI will manage this for us at some point, hopefully, our smart bank account, right? But I do think there's potential there for us to sort of overdo regulation in this arena. Not to mention
I think
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The point you were making earlier, I think, is a good point as well, and very much linked to this, which is, at some point this will be an unmanageable amount of information seemingly for customers, right?
Exactly.
But if you go back to kind of like the last iteration of digital, which did mobile apps and things and websites and things like that. I mean, when I think back to, mobile apps 10 years ago could do like 3 or 4 things. And it was a big innovation when you could deposit your check. I think the US Bank mobile app can do like 350 things now or something. There's like a huge, enormous amount. And I have always thought about, like, how can a customer possibly navigate to the 350th thing? And, so I think as we think about all of these things, I think are really interesting challenges for kind of information architecture, to coin a kind of a phrase. And I think things like AI and voice enablement will help customers cut through the clutter. But I think that I see the challenge of having this volume of information to manage with where all your data is, in a kind of similar way to the enormous amount of functions and features that one has in mobile apps and websites. I think that the advances of design, navigation, and then technologies like AI and voice assistants will help all of these things, including keeping a track of all of your data, to your point.
So I had one more thing to add, if you don't mind, onto this point, because I think that customers' sense of confidence in how banks manage their data is extremely important. And I think that it's our job as Plaid to help ensure that financial account can remain the center and the hub of that person's financial life, so that the other tools that they want to use, whether or not that's within the 350 things that the US Bank app can do, or whether or not it's through another provider, can be facilitated through that sharing of data of their US Bank account. And so the easier we can get at sharing that information out and enabling consumers to have a really slick and seamless experience with the tools that they want to avail themselves of, while ensuring that they have that sense of confidence that US Bank is taking care of them, like, that's where you really hit the sweet spot, because people feel like they're enabled and they're empowered, yet they don't need to change, right? Like, US Bank is taking care of them and enabling them to do all the things they want to.
I'm curious, in all this enablement and everything that Gareth outlined in terms of like over 300 things you can do, Ginger, from your perspective, how do you even begin to get your head around supporting that, right? Like this ever escalating, like, I do not envy being in charge of platform that has to support where all of this is going, and at the same time being able to say, and in the future we might have to be able to, expunge the data or change the features. How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's all about understanding what are the capabilities and requirements that each of the institutions with whom we work have and are prioritizing. And then how do we ensure that the platform that we're building has these components embedded in it, not as one-off solutions for each individual integration that we're working on, but as a platform component that can be availed to any of our partners. And so when at Plaid, we think about these connections with the industry in a couple of different ways. Sometimes, as in the case of US Bank, we work with US Bank's infrastructure and APIs that they've developed, but we may augment that technology with some features and capabilities that we've put together to ensure that we've got that consumer experience top of mind. In other circumstances, we have created Plaid Exchange, which is a platform for financial institutions that may not have the resources that they need to build APIs themselves. And so in conjunction with the industry and a lot of the good work that John does with FDX, we understand, like, what are the core things that need to be included in these kinds of platform capabilities, and then prioritize the things that we build, like Plaid Exchange, in conjunction with what FDX is also putting together for the industry, so that we're enabling others to take advantage of the way that this technology is evolving. And then in the third instances, it's often a little bit of a mismatch, a mix and match, where the financial institution may have created some capabilities, but we will also provide some as well, and then partner to put something together that enables us to move to an API-based ecosystem and delete credentials more quickly.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ginger. Well, listen, guys, we need to take a quick break, and we'll be back talking more about open banking and how consumers are reacting to the need for more control over their finances, contextual credit. We might even get into some buy now, pay later stuff and things like that, talking about that contextually. But stay tuned with us. You're listening to Breaking Banks. We're talking with Plaid and US Bank about secure open finance. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Breaking Banks, the #1 global fintech podcast and radio show. We are back with Plaid and the team at US Bank. Well, when I say team, Gareth Gaston is one of the team at US Bank. So I maybe ask you guys this. Obviously, the pandemic has seen an acceleration in digitization, but we do have changing user behavior here. Are consumers more in tune with their rights in terms of data access, and is like in terms of consumer creditworthiness and financial behavior and things like that? Do you see generally more consumer demand coming for open banking and the possibilities it provides? Who wants to jump in on that one? John?
Yeah, I can.
Ginger,
I can
you go
just jump
first.
in with a couple of fun data points, because it's always good to ground our conversations in data. But a survey we did last year at Plaid said that 73% of respondents plan to just continue managing all of their money through digital tools as opposed to in branch locations and physical places. And that 14 million US citizens consider digital banking to now be their only form of money management. And so that is a broad thing, right? That's not just about checking and savings. That is, how do I manage my financial life? And people's financial lives are quite diverse, right? Everything from sending payroll information to looking for credit and lending opportunities to purchases and payments to savings and balancing and personal financial management. So it goes on and on and on. And I think the thing that we've definitely seen over the course of the last 12 to 18 months is that digital is here to stay. And we probably jumped 5 years ahead in this past year. And that's exciting. I think that's really exciting for a lot of us. But per the question just before the break, we've got a lot to build in order to manage how this industry is going to scale.
Yeah, I think what we see from a bank's perspective and from US Bank specifically is, first, I think all tides are rising really from a digital engagement perspective. So, I think first of all, we do see, huge increase in use of external third-party digital solutions, and that you can see through the proxy of how many of our customers are going through a service like Plaid, and it's about half of our digitally active customers now are using some form of external service, which is definitely a lot more than it was, a few years ago, and that continues to grow. Equally, though, and I think this is really important, it's not an and/or, which of course was sometimes the fear that people would start using external services and the bank wouldn't get its wouldn't keep its engagement with customers. But actually, we see the opposite being true. Customers are becoming more engaged with third-party services, and they're becoming far more engaged with our digital tools and capabilities as well. And some of that is because it's important that you keep innovating with the digital tools and experiences that you have. So we've continued to innovate in the basic things like mobile check deposit, and the usage of mobile check deposit has never been higher. And then creating things like AI-driven insights that keep the customer coming back to see what can they learn from the information that they have in their accounts about their spending patterns and about their financial life. So I think that we're seeing huge engagement from customers on both fronts.
Gareth, just before we continue, just for the millennials and the Gen Zs and the alphas listening to Breaking Banks, could you explain what a check is?
I was going to say, this sounds like you're about to make me sound old or something. Of course, I come from a country where we don't have these things, so I had to relearn what checks were when I came here. So yes, a check is an amazing piece of paper that has the potential to have the same value as that digital thing that you sent over Zelle. That's my best description for a check.
Well, now they're going to say, what is a Zelle? You mean a Venmo?
Oh, they're not.
Yeah,
Everyone
Venmo.
knows who Zelle
Yes.
is. Everyone knows who Zelle is.
I think, Brett, I may have told you this story before. I'm going to tell it again because it's my favorite one. So, I worked at Square for a number of years and was very involved in the development of the payment rails for Cash App, and have been a huge proponent of trying to get my family to switch to Cash App because that was the product I was working on, and I thought that that was the right thing to do. And so my parents would just never use it, and I would send them money if they took the kids out to lunch or they bought the kids something. I'd try to pay them back on Cash App, and they just couldn't get behind it. And then this year, because of the pandemic, because not because of convenience, but because they needed to actually protect their physical health, my parents started using Zelle. And it was such a big deal, and I actually think it was through US Bank, Gareth, I'm not sure, but
awesome. Very happy to hear that.
It was like I don't know if it was the pandemic that finally, broke not just the younger generations, but the older generations as well, who are now using these digital tools. It was fun to see.
I have a funny story related to that, Ginger, that will take us in the next direction. I was working with a community bank board. Let's just say it was one of the oldest boards I've ever worked with. And the question was raised, under the guise of there's no such thing as a bad question. And one of the women on the board goes, so if I use that Venmo thing, is the mafia going to steal all my money like immediately? Like, it was a valid concern. Like, this is what she believed to be true. And I explained, how it worked and, why it was secure and stuff. And she goes, yeah, my grandkids do that Venmo thing. And so we set it up on break, set up actual Venmo for her. And she had the kid's cell phone's number, and it was right before the holidays. And so they were in finals. So she sent each one of the kids like $5 in the coffee emoji, right? And the next time I saw her at a future board meeting, she was so excited. She said, I send those grandkids like $100. I don't even get a thank you note. I sent them $5 and they sent me all of these emojis, back. Right. And she goes, so now actually the retired women I do lunch with, we use Venmo when we go out to lunch to split the bill. Right. And not only, I think it's a funny story to relate to kind of when that adoption curve happens, but there's something very true about this when we get into the open finance realm, that part of this is going to be experiential and what it's going to unlock for people and that level of engagement. And Gareth, I'd love if you have any stories related to how that engagement has really worked, because that's counterintuitive. So many of the traditional banks in the US have been so afraid of the capital O, capital B banking coming to the US. If it were going to happen here, does that shift the power to the startups, right? Like, it's unfair. We've built this up. How has it played out for you to be a great business engagement tool?
You mean from engaging with open banking? You mean?
Yeah. So with the customers, you said that engagement's actually up, that by working with third parties, you're not driving people out of the bank. Actually opening the doors brought more people, into the bank.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think, as I say, I think it's got to be a sustained effort on both fronts, because if you only engaged in open banking, then you would definitely drive more engagement off of your brand and on your brand. I think what we have is I wouldn't even call it balance, because I think we're going kind of all in on both perspectives. We want to provide a very rich experience in our own branded tools, and we want to also fully enable the customer where they want to be. And we also, as well, allow the customer, we're a data recipient too, because we also engage in aggregating, allowing the customer to bring in their bank accounts from other banks and present that on the US Bank digital experience as well, and also apply some of the analysis that we have to their external accounts also. So, so I think the key is actually engaging with the customer wherever they choose to be and making that experience as good as possible. So that's really been our approach. And so it's with that kind of mentality that means that we can fully embrace it and not really be afraid of it, I think, because we feel really good that we're providing amazing digital tools. So we feel very confident that we can embrace and open up and make sure our customers can do what they want to do externally as well. So don't really view it as an either or. I also think very early on, we just viewed it as something that's going to happen rather than something we should resist, if you like, So I think it then became, when I go back to that genesis that Dominic and team had around embracing open banking 2.5 years ago, and then bringing that to full circle to becoming a reality. And linking it back to the conversation we're having today, we're extremely grateful for the partnership with Plaid, because I think what we came to with a very pragmatic joint view around the customer enabled us to break some barriers that perhaps some other banks would be a bit more reticent to break. And because it's all in service of empowering the customer and keeping everyone safe and secure, I think I personally find that quite liberating, because you're doing, at the end of the day, the right thing for the customer, but not compromising the sort of safety and security standards as well. So I think that, as I say, the key is to try and be as good as you can be on all fronts, and then you don't have to be afraid of what will happen when you embrace the open stuff.
This obviously leads to a really interesting conversation on partnerships. And John, I know you've got a point here, but Gareth, my question probably is around the fact that, with all of this data and with the Plaid relationship now, US Bank can see, or at least determine a lot more the behavioral elements of finance, when and where people are inquiring about their balance or need information on access to credit and so forth. So we're seeing buy now, pay later and all of these other things emerge as ways to contextualize banking, as you say, when and where they need it. Mm-hmm. So, but the potential for that is that these new products that we might create based on this data may not be the products we're used to delivering. They may have the same utility, like buy now, pay later instead of a credit card or an overdraft, mm-hmm. as an example. So how is this leading US Bank down that path? And then, where do players like Plaid come into that is sort of the second piece of that. But, in terms of building out these experiences you're talking about when the customer needs them, how's that changed the design thinking internally?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely spot on. I think that there's probably a few different waves of this. I think the first wave that we embraced, so in terms of this new amount of data and also the ability to have AI applied to data, I would say the first wave of change that we applied there was our insights that we drive through our app, and we were pretty much the first of any bank really to start delivering insights at scale, and we deliver hundreds of millions of these things to our customers all the time. So I think that was the first big wave of change, is to help the customer be more informed about their financial life, right? It's kind of living the dream. I think you've mentioned this in some of your books, right? That banks have access to all of this information about customers and generally don't do much with it. And it's not about what we do with it for ourselves. It's about how we visualize that and give really meaningful and useful insights to customers so that they can take action and do something different with their financial life, whether that is information about credit, or whether that's information about spending patterns, or whether that's information about even useful things like, hey, two transactions with the same things, are you sure that those are both legitimate? So that the first big wave, I think, for us was about providing those insights. And then I think the next thing after that is how do we think, well, obviously the next thing was creating these data sharing agreements and empowering customers to do this off of us as well as on us. And then I think the third thing is also, the third wave, I think, is embracing some of those services. So whilst we haven't brought some of this to market, we know that customers want to embed these services because that's why they're going to third parties. So it's not a stretch to think, well, how can we, especially I would say in the context of a small business customer, how can you take some of the things that they want, that they need to run their business, and embed that into their banking relationship as well? So it's not just about embedding banking somewhere else, it's about embedding other things into your banking experience too. And then the fourth thing I would say, to your point, is what are the opportunities for new products and services? And we've got initiatives and some of the things that you mentioned earlier that we plan to bring to market. So I think AI-driven insights, data sharing, and enablement, looking at open banking for us as a consumer of open banking or open finance, and then finally informing product development, I would say, are the four ways we're thinking about that.
Cool.
Question related to this is Brett teed up the partnership question. So Gareth, it sounds like this started with Dominic's team at US Bank. This is a big, bold, kind of crazy idea of this. Hey, let's go, do this secure open finance, be able to go do this. did you naturally go, let's just pick up the phone and call Plaid and see what they do? But what's the genesis? Like, and from the flip side, Ginger and John, I'm curious what your first response was. Like, is it like, are you guys nuts? Like, can we start a little bit smaller, do something a little bit easier? How did that partnership come together?
Well, I mean, first of all, Plaid was a great place to start because they're one of the largest or the largest player in terms of the volume of customers. So they were, a really obvious place to start. I will say that, this is meant to really accentuate the positiveness of the great relationship that we've had. It was a really difficult conversation to start with, right? Because neither of us really, this was uncharted territory for both of us. So it was initially unclear how, what each of our motivations were and how, what each of us actually wanted out of it. And, I think the thing that's been really refreshing and galvanizing is that we both all of a sudden discovered one day that we had the shared interests of the customer at heart. And when we actually took a step back and stopped talking about, what the bank wanted or what Plaid wanted, and we focused on the customer, we realized that actually when we thought about it through the customer's lens, that was kind of what was best for both of us as well. So the partnership became a lot easier from that point. And, I think we both probably made compromises along the way. The way we connect is probably not what some banks would say is the ideal way of connecting. But actually, when you take a step back and think about actually what's really important here is that customers have access to their data in a safe and secure manner, and that they have transparency over the information. If you can really ground yourself in that belief, then it helps you to remove a lot of the obstacles and barriers. So it's been, an absolute pleasure and delight to kind of get to this point with Plaid and to really work through what were, as you alluded to there were some really difficult and challenging conversations because there's a lot of new ground that's been broken here. But I think really testament to, two very motivated parties that want to do the best thing for the customer coming together to make it happen.
And yeah, I'll add to that point, Gareth. I mean, I think this kind of close collaboration, the relationship between Plaid and US Bank is a real prime example of what we're going to need to see more of in the industry as we help open banking to grow and flourish and open finance to evolve. And so I would agree with many of the things that Gareth said. I think starting from the first principles is really what got this relationship to be so successful. There was no argument that we all wanted to have a secure experience for US Bank account holders. There was no argument that we wanted US Bank account holders to have an amazing experience. And so once you start prioritizing based on those principles, you still have to work out some of the how. And sure, maybe we had technology built to do A and we decided to do B instead. But those things are much easier to invest in and resource when you can tie them back to the overall vision of a secure and transparent ecosystem with the consumer at the center. And that's what US Bank and Plaid were really able to achieve.
And I draw a contrast there, Ginger, Jason, to go back to a question you asked right before break, right? About, in Europe, you've got this regulation and, how are you managing this without the regulation in the US? And the answer is the regulation is helpful in Europe, but it's also, let's take the UK particularly, written from a what is good for certain businesses versus other businesses perspective, as opposed to the consumer perspective, right? So in Europe, you are either a bank, an ASPSP that's a data source, or you are a TPP that's a data recipient, and never the twain shall meet. And Gareth just said something really, really important 5 minutes ago, right? Which is US Bank is a data source and a data consumer. The platform of open finance is more valuable to them because they are using the data to make better consumer experiences. That allows you to have that consumer as the goal. And that's a really different approach to open finance than I think some of the regulations in Europe have. It's something I think that with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau driving the bus in the US, right, it's about the consumer's data access right. So I think we're going to have even better regulations in the US, but I think it's going to require a lot of market innovation by companies like Plaid and US Bank that have that shared consumer objective as the core of why open finance, to really get us to that place where that regulation can then add the most value, create the most valuable platform, and really return the true consumer benefits of open finance to their maximum level.
I think regulating in Europe as well is perhaps a little more straightforward because the number of players in any particular country is dramatically smaller than the 6,000 odd that you have in the US market, all with varying degrees of maturity.
Yeah, and I think to build on Gareth's point, I mean, this partnership with US Bank and Plaid is really a milestone, right, in our overall journey towards open finance as an industry and as partners. It's been exciting for us as Plaid to hear the feedback from other financial institution partners after they saw the work that we had done with US Bank as an example of what we can all achieve together when we put that consumer at the center and build our solutions with that as the foundation. So this is just one step forward, and we'll be working with US Bank on other types of partnerships and opportunities in the future. Gareth, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, just to echo, I think this is it's a terrific partnership, and I'm really thrilled that we've been able to enable our customers to access their information in a very transparent way. To your point, I think this is just the beginning of what all of this open banking stuff was all about, which is enabling our customers to have access to information, but more now, what can they do with that, and what other services can US Bank and Plaid offer to these third parties and to customers that will really power their financial lives. So I think we're just at the beginning of a very exciting journey in the next phase of banking.
I'm mindful we've only got a couple of minutes left, Gareth, but just my experience as a fintech working with banks is generally that the partnership element of these relationships starts with the procurement department, which is exactly the wrong way to handle these types of partnerships. So how has your partnership capability developed at US Bank as a result of, partnerships like this?
Yeah, and I think it's developed and developing because I think that, as you say, it's fundamentally a mind shift here, which is, there's a few things that have to change. One is recognizing that the product that you're selling isn't actually a financial product, it's an API technology solution. So there's a mindset shift and also a skill set shift in what it is you're selling and how you're selling it. There's also a different audience. So whilst there are the traditional businesses that were your customers that you would know, there's now a whole different category of customers that are coming to ask for these technology products as well. And then finally, you have to kind of take another think about the processes and the way you engage. So to your point, not just about don't start with procurement, but also the expectation being a technology-driven solution is that you can get up and running and be working within minutes, not within months. So there's a lot to get your head around as you think about gearing up to compete in this new way.
Well, exciting to see where all of this can begin to go. I think we're going to have this crew back on, 6 months to a year from now to see both how the partnership has flourished, but all the amazing things that have come out of it, even the ones that couldn't be foreseen. So thank you, folks from Plaid, to Gareth at US Bank, Ginger, and John. That's a wrap for this week's Breaking Banks. You can hear us at all of your major podcast stations or check it out at provoke.fm.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having us.
That's it for this week. If you like the show, make sure to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, or share it with a friend, or share it on social media.
We'll see you again next week with more Breaking Banks.